Here are 3 things that you need to know if you are retiring with a pension and Social Security. Welcome, my name is Daniel, founder of McCluskey Financial. We currently serve a few dozen clients. And the first is that all that needs to happen in retirement is your income needs to exceed your expenses. Now there's a caveat to that I'll explain in a bonus point at the end, but if your goal is just to be able to stop working, you're less concerned with inheritances or whatever else, all you need is more money coming in than you are spending. So regardless, if you don't have very much stuffed away in 401ks and IRAs, the amount of money that you have saved virtually means nothing. Now, of course it does for many in terms of how much income it can actually produce, but a lot of times people with pensions will get upset just looking at their quote unquote net worth sheet, thinking all those years I didn't have much extra money to put away into accounts like 401ks or IRAs. They feel behind. However, what you don't want to forget is the amount that you will receive in a pension should actually equate to some sort of dollar value. For example, if you have a 401k worth $1 million, just using the basic 4% rule, that amount is only going to be able to produce so much income a year, adjusting for inflation over time. So in that case, it would be a little over $3,300 a month. If you had $500,000, you were able to receive, using the 4% rule, a little over $1,650 a month, $250,833. So if you have a pension that's receiving $1,667 a month and you feel like you have no savings, well, that is kind of equivalent, not quite, but to having $500,000 saved in a 401k that you're going to use the 4% rule to take that money for income. Of course, all of that, because it's a 401k, is pre-tax. You have to pay taxes on it. So all that needs to happen is your income needs to be greater than your expenses. Point number 2, do not forget about inflation when you're factoring this in. So many pensions don't actually increase for inflation, or the way that they do could be a little bit skewed. So sometimes it'll say, we're going to increase by 2.5% a year every single year. Others might have a certain sort of calculation where, based on what the actual general inflation rate is in the US, they are going to attempt to inflate it by that much. Some don't do this at all. So you really want to make sure that you understand how your pension functions in terms of inflation. Many of you probably know that Social Security has what is called a COLA, or a cost of living adjustment, which is basically, just like we mentioned there before, it tries to get a general feel for what inflation is in the US and then inflates your Social Security check by that much. However, also, many of you are probably familiar with the current state of Social Security and the solvency issues of being projected to be solvent. It was 2035, since Trump has added the tax deductions for seniors in the big, beautiful bill. However, that actually decreased revenues for Social Security, moving that date from 2035 actually even earlier. So there really is only 2 choices that the Social Security Administration has. This is actually outlined in, this is Tom Marsnow's book, Social Security and Simple and Smart. He just updated it for 2025. They have to raise revenues or they have to cut benefits. One of those suggestions that has been brought forward as a 25% fix to the problem is reducing the cost of living adjustment by 0.3%. That would actually be a 25% fix on the situation that's currently at hand. Now that might not sound like very much, but as point number 3 says here, small shortfalls over a very long period of time will only continue to compound and get worse. So don't forget about inflation, not only in just checking if your pension and Social Security have those inflation adjustments, but remembering those might not track to what inflation actually is, and you want to account for that. Maybe that is as simple as just making sure that the income that you're receiving is a little bit greater than your expenses, but not quite, just a little bit above it. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video, leave a like and let me know. Which leads us directly into our third point, which is don't sell yourself short on your expenses. So not only because of inflation, but also because a lot of the time when people try to track how much it actually costs them to live, they usually will think that it's less than it actually is. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is go back and look at your last 2 years of spending and see how that lines up with the estimates that you came up with for what your expenses will be in retirement. If you're getting $4,000 a month, but when you go back and calculate it the last 2 or 3 years and it's actually been $5,000 a month accounting for inflation, you might want to account for that when you're running this calculation of, hey, all I need to do is get my income greater than my expenses. You want to make sure you use the true numbers and not just your projections. Also, another way to stop that from happening and having your expenses that you calculate actually line up with what your real spending has been, is including every single category, including miscellaneous. So maybe you have things that aren't monthly expenses, but you pay on an annual basis. Maybe you have surprise hospital visits, helping children out, different flights that you have to take or gifts you have to get for people. You want to account all of these in, and that is exactly why when you are trying to calculate your income just being greater than your expenses, I would always budget a little bit more because of this here, because of the inflation factor that we said before. And also, we've got to keep in mind what the actual gross number is versus what the number will be post-taxes. So if you need $5,000 a month to live, but you've got to pay taxes, well, you've got to need more than $5,000 a month in income, unless all of that is tax-free. Finally, a bonus tip here, know what happens when either spouse dies, especially if you're heavily reliant on the pension and the Social Security. The vast majority of the time, the income is going to decrease. Now, that can also mean that the expenses are going to decrease, but don't assume this is going to be the case. I would actually go through an exercise and see what those would be. For me, for example, I just got married 5 months ago. My expenses are virtually the same because before I would eat out. Now I don't do that as much. So it might not be a very safe assumption just to assume, well, if one spouse dies, I know my expenses are going to cut in half. So even though my income would be cut in half, I'd be fine. I wouldn't go with that line of thinking. It may be true, but at least run the numbers and make sure. Reason being, of course, one of the Social Security benefits is going to stop. Of course, there are spousal benefits, there are survivor benefits, but still, generally, these are going to be lower than the combined two that you were getting before. As well, with pensions, you also want to check, is your spouse going to get the full? Are they going to get half? Are they going to get it just for a set period of time? So factor all that in. And again, the income just needs to be greater than your expenses. Of course, calculate that honestly, account for inflation. And remember, just because you have no savings does not mean you are behind. So many people with hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions in 401ks, would much rather be in your position, having the guaranteed income there, knowing it's going to be there for life. This is why people with $5 million plus, a lot of the times they are looking into buying their own pension with private insurance companies just to give them that permission to start spending the money they've had their entire life. It's not a problem that you have to worry about. You have the pension, you have the Social Security, you know that money's going to come in, you can spend it. If you're within 10 years of retirement in the US, subscribe. I release videos for you twice a week on how to do that peacefully.